Hi, this is Zach with Worn&Wound. Today I'll be taking a look at the Damasko Dc66 chronograph. Damasko is a brand that we quite like here at Worn&Wound. They're a German brand, German-made watches. They're one of these brands that are actually one of very few brands that put a lot of technology into their watches. Everything about this is really customized, custom-made by them, made largely in-house, save the movement, but they do actually do some in-house movements just in different watches. But one of their most notable things, their case technology, while the case might look very kind of normal, kind of a pilot chronograph style from the, just the outside, internally and throughout, it's made of some very impressive materials and has a lot of patented technology that just make it really stand out, really tough, really good, like long wearing watch. And if you are familiar with Damasko and you've read about some of the reviews on our site, you'll know that their watches are all fairly similar. They're basically pilot watches or aviator watches. They have a couple different dial styles. This will be the third one we reviewed. The first chronograph of theirs we reviewed. The last watch, though, that we discussed was sort of like a three-hand sibling to this watch. What's interesting about their chronographs is just, really that they're just super rugged, robust, straightforward, legibility focused. And for all the technology that's in here, still a fairly decent value. So this watch comes in at $2,305 if purchased in the US, and that's with a leather strap. One quick note is that this is not the original leather strap that it comes with. I do not have that. This is actually a watch I personally own. But this is similar to a strap that you would find with it. It is by probably the same brand, which is Bezel. So, it's fairly similar to what this watch would look like straight out of the box. So yeah, let's take a closer look. The case of the Damasko Dc66 is very clearly in the pilot style. There's not a lot of like aesthetic surprises about it, but it's a very clean, straightforward look with some, in my opinion, really nice proportions and just a couple of nice details, like how the teeth on the bezel are very chunky and they have really nice grip. They're just a couple of points that make it kind of stand out. So the design itself, like I said, it's very straightforward. It's a 42mm case, but it's about 44 at the bezel. It's about 48mm lug to lug and 14mm thick. And of course, it is quite thick because it is a chronograph, and the bezel also kind of adds on to that. They do make their chronographs without bezels, and I believe those are actually in a slightly smaller case even. They might be around 40mm. So this is actually, I believe, as big as a Damasko gets. 42mm for a pilot chronograph, though. The big bezel is absolutely kind of a normal, it's kind of a logical size for it. I think it wears really well, which you'll see on the wrist. Even though I lean towards smaller watches, this doesn't feel all too big to me. But looking at the case itself, as I mentioned before, what really makes their watches so crazy is the case technology, and that starts with the steel. So Damasko has their own in-house made ice-hardened nickel-free stainless steel. It's 710 Vickers hardness all the way through the metal, so it's not a surface treatment. It's literally all the way through, so these are very impervious to scratching. In fact, actually, I've worn this watch a lot. I mean, this is, like I said, this is my own watch. I've worn this watch fairly regularly for probably a year and a half or so, and I've not done anything to it, and I do hit things on occasion. So it's very, very impervious. And it's all around. It's not that they don't use that steel selectively. Everything, even the crowns and pushers and the tubes that are holding those are all ice hardened. And then the bezel here, once again, ice hardened steel, but the insert is what's called a Damasko insert. It is ceramic with a coating on it, all proprietary stuff. This is super, super, super hard. It's harder, I believe, than even average ceramic. And then while we're on this, the mechanism on the bezel is my favorite bezel mechanism, hands down, of any watch I've felt. This thing, it's a 60-click or bidirectional rather, so it goes both ways, but is ratcheting. And just the way this snaps into place, it's perfectly exact. It has this great feel to it. It's, I mean, like none other. You see there's no wiggle, just click, click, click. And it actually has a, once again, in-house developed ceramic bearing system. So, I mean, that alone, I mean, all those little things alone make this watch just kind of a real standout. Stuff you won't see in watches, 5 to 10 grand, rarely, if even at all. I mean, nobody really puts, few brands put this level of attention into all those details. The other brand, obviously, that comes to mind is Sin, also in Germany. A lot of similarities between these two watches, but this is still my favorite bezel I've ever felt. Continuing on, the pushers and the crowns all have self-lubricating cells in them, which, you know, is just awesome. It's not something you're going to see very often. And that just, you know, is supposed to basically guarantee that the pushers and crown stay very smooth acting through, you know, a much longer time than I guess you would normally find. How long that is, I'm not sure. The crown then has various patents in it. It has double or maybe even triple Viton gasket seals. Those are kind of the most impervious of the rubber gaskets, so you're not going to worry about those dissolving in, you know, high pH solutions should you come into contact with something like that. But the crown also feels great. Working these crowns is excellent. They're super easy to rethread. You're not going to have a hard time kind of finding the thread. Once again, though, that's all hardened steel, so it's going to be much more resilient should you get a little off. And on top of that, the way it's actually fit in here, the tube itself is fit into the case, so that actually all can come out. In the instance of a total failure, total stripping, they can actually replace that whole part rather than having to, you know, let's say rethread something or like that. So, you know, just in that sense, once again, you're going to have a much longer lasting watch. So, you know, all these things just go together once make it super tough. Flipping the watch over now, I love this case back. It's all in German. I don't know what it says other than made in Germany here. I can read that part, but I just love how technical it is. Obviously speaks to everything I just said about the watch. If you were to take that off, you'd also see that the movement itself is held within a, you know, a Farrier cage or an anti-magnetic cage. So the watch does have a magnetic resistance of, you know, like 80,000 units, which, you know, is the standard kind of like good magnetic anti-magnetism you're going to find in most watches. One thing to note, though, about these watches, and this is a curious side effect of the way these cases are made, is that they actually get a slight magnetism to them. So I don't have like a compass here, but I have seen this before. If you were to put a compass next to my watch right now, it would actually point to the watch. So the watch itself is a little bit magnetic. Has to do with the process of making the steel. It somehow, you know, I don't know the science behind it, to be honest. Obviously the watch itself is protected, though, because the movement is in an anti-magnetic cage, but it is a curious, and I think some people don't love that aspect of it. The bezel of the Damasko Dc66 is actually available in two different styles. Here you have the 12-hour bezel, sometimes referred to as a Zulu bezel, or you can get it in kind of a typical 5 to 55 minute or lapse time bezel. I prefer this. I think this is more interesting. When you're looking at the watch right now, you might be like, well, it's redundant because you have 1 and 1, 2 and 2. But what's great about this is if you travel at all, and you wanted to keep track of 2 time zones, this is like the cheapest, easiest way to do that. So you simply just, you know, okay, well then there's a 2-hour difference here, and you can read that, you know, the time is 2:35 in one time zone or 12:35 in the other. So it just, you know, I love that aspect of it. I've actually used that quite a bit, so I prefer that style. But once again, you can get it in either, I believe, if you're ordering it direct. The dial of the Damasko Dc66 is straightforward, kind of military pilot. It's in some ways almost lacking in style, but I think in kind of a military fashion, makes a statement in that way and becomes kind of its own, you know, very attractive look. I mean, not for everybody. It's very sober kind of a dial. There's really, you know, nothing flashy about it. I find it very appealing, but I am a big fan of military style watches. So, you know, looking at it, obviously you have this index of quite large, you know, Arabic numerals here. You're not going to miss them. You're not going to misread them. They're very clear, you know, clearly presented. They're not at 12 and 6, obviously because of the sub-registers for the chronograph. At 12, you have a triangle, kind of in true pilot fashion there. Off of 3, you have 2 interesting things going on here. You have the Damasko logo, and then you have the day and date. One thing that's interesting about the Damasko watches, this is, I believe, true across the board with all of their watches that feature a date, is that they do a customized off-center date. So as you can see here, it's not center with the horizon line basically of the watch. If you draw a line from 9 to 3, typically that would cross through the date. Here they put it just below. I quite like that, though. It at the same time does one really kind of awkward thing on this watch. On some of their other watches, such as the kind of the three-hand version of this watch, you'll notice it has crosshairs going around the dial. So what happens is there's a line that would be bisecting the space between Damasko and the date there. And that fills in that space well. Here, the Damasko, to me, feels a little bit like it's floating away. So I kind of wish on this watch that the Damasko had been moved down in that line. I look at that, I just, as a kind of, designer, sometimes that kind of thing just irks me, but it doesn't. I wear this watch a lot. It's never really caused me any real concern. It's just something that stands out in my mind. Outside of the main index here, you have a minute and second index, or rather chronograph second index, just little lines with squares at intervals of 5. Interestingly, the loom on this watch is not where you think it's going to be. I mean, if I were to guess, I would say, oh, all those numbers are, loomed. But it's actually just those squares and then the 12-hour mark, the triangle there, and the pip on the bezel, and then the hands. So there's actually a lot less loom than you'd anticipate. It's very minimal looking at night. It's not the brightest loom, but it's not terrible either. But yeah, there's surprisingly little of it. Looking now at the hands, in kind of true aviator pilot style, the Damasko has Roman sword hands for the hour and minute. Once again, very typical for this kind of watch, but if you've seen many of these types of watches, they're not all the same. And it really comes down to the proportions, the length, the width. Sometimes Roman sword hands, in my opinion, get a little absurd looking because they get a little too fat or a little bit too bold, too stylized, if you will. So I really like the Damasko hands. I think they're kind of the perfect size. They look really good on the watch. They're extremely legible. I think they just really nailed those subtle little dimensions. And in this style too, I quite like that they're full loom, loom edge to edge. For most of the portion of the hand, rather than having an edge around it. I just think it's a more attractive style for this watch. Looking at the other hands now, the second hand is kind of a tapering stick. It's a little bit thicker in the center, so it just has a nice boldness to it, which I think you need. I mean, there's so much white actually on this dial that you can kind of maybe get lost when you're looking at everything. I'm actually a little surprised it doesn't have a colored hand, but as is, I don't have any issues reading it. And then you just have simple stick hands for all the sub-registers. Once again, just kind of the minimal execution there to keep everything, you make nothing too loud, make nothing jump out too much. The DC66 is powered by a Valjoux 7750 automatic chronograph, the standard of automatic chronographs. If you ever use one, you'll know it'll be very familiar. Obviously, you start it with the button by 2. You also pause it with the button at 2, and then you reset it with the button at 4. You set the date by putting into first position. One direction changes the day, the other direction changes the date, and then obviously third position is time. 7750 is super robust movement. I mean, there's a reason why they were so popular and been used so regularly. It's a 25 jewel movement. Hacking, hand winding, etc. The one thing I'll note about them, and this is something you see time to time, and actually something that is present on this watch, there's a bit of an occasional jitter in the central second hand, and that does have to do with actually how the 7750 is designed. That is sometimes the case. You'll see it's a little bit jumpy. I mean, it should be a smooth sweep there. It's unfortunate, I have to say. It's a little annoying, but it depends on how often you use your chronograph and what you use your chronograph for, if that's actually going to interfere with your usage of the watch. For me, it did not interfere with it, though I would prefer a perfectly smooth sweep. A cool thing about Damasko, though, is they actually do some movement modification. So here, like I said before, the date is set below, but then if you were to step up in their kind of line, so this is sort of one of their base chronographs at 2,300, but you go up a bit, they have with their SI models, and they'll actually say SI on the dial. And in those models, they have in-house made silicium hairsprings in them, so that greatly will essentially give a longer life to them, as well as increase the anti-magnetism, I believe, substantially. And eventually they also make their own in-house movements, though those are currently they have a GMT, but otherwise they're timer. They don't have a full in-house chronograph as of yet. On the wrist, the Damasko Dc66 I think wears very well for a larger watch. You know, as I said, it's 42 millimeters in diameter, about 44 to the bezel, but it's not very long at 48 millimeters, and I think that's really the more significant dimension here. Also, the fact that the lugs taper to quite a thin point. You know, they're very svelte, so it just kind of takes away some of the mass, really puts the focus towards the center of the watch, so it just doesn't feel like this big clunky watch. And like I said, I prefer smaller watches in general, but I've worn this watch a lot and I find it totally comfortable. It is tall, it is 14 millimeters tall, there's no getting around that, so you know, you will sometimes find it catching on your sleeve, or if you're wearing gloves or something, it can be a little bit annoying, but that's the caveat of automatic chronographs, generally speaking. But yeah, I mean, I find it comfortable. 7-inch wrist here, so not the biggest wrist. So I do think it's fairly wearable, and then it just looks great. It's a very cool looking watch. As I said, it's no nonsense. This is a very purpose-driven tool watch. You know, it's rugged, it's legible, and it's kind of in that lack of ornamentation, lack of stylizing, that it has its own kind of stripped down minimal aesthetic that I personally find very appealing. I find I wear this a lot. I mean, I wear typically fairly casual clothing, Oxfords, jeans, boots, you know, stuff like that. And this never really feels out of place. And obviously you can change the look and feel of the watch with different straps. So once again, this isn't the strap this actually comes with. This is a D-Model Pilot strap, but I do believe these watches come with something very, very similar. And some of the models definitely do come with these. They might have custom stitching. But you can see why this is a really nice strap for this watch. It has a cutout design, so the lugs kind of feed into that. This actually makes it a little bit bolder, if anything, but I just like the look, and I think that the contrast stitching here works nice with the very, the monotone look and of the watch as a whole. But obviously this is black too, so it kind of creates even a little bit more of a severe look. We'll show you now what it looks like on a nylon strap as well as a different type of leather. Here the DC66 is on a kind of a drab brown nylon mill strap. This is a style that works extremely well for the DC66. Obviously, military watch, pilot watch, this type of strap is a logical choice for them. But I really like actually what a little bit of color does for this watch. Obviously it's a drab military color, but I think it kind of brings out some nice elements of the watch, particularly the finish on the case, which I might not have talked too much about, but one of the really sexy features, if you will, of these Damasko watches is the beautiful satin finish, which on top of the fact that it has a darker, almost titanium gray metal from the ice hardening. I think it's just a really interesting color to play with, definitely very rugged looking. Lastly, I just wanted to show you the watch on one of our 22 millimeter Color 8 Model 1 watch straps. So the Color 8 is a burgundy color with a gray stitch here. And this color, as I was saying before, you have that nice gray from the case, and I think that the Color 8, the dark burgundy, works exceptionally well with darker gray steels and titaniums. So as a nice way, kind of an alternative to black, or even necessarily to brown. I mean, this is definitely in the family of brown. I think this does a really good job of emphasizing the case, but staying in kind of a dark and sort of masculine tonality. To wrap up, the Damasko DC66 is a really great option for a really rugged pilot chronograph watch. At $2,300, give or take a bit, it's, I think, a really good value. Obviously, it's not the least expensive watch on earth, but it's, comparable to what most I think new automatic chronographs are going to go for you, if not even a bit less than what a lot of brands are doing. But with the amount of case technology you're getting in this watch, it's an exceptional value, because you're not really finding any of those features in most other brands. Obviously, the brand it's competing most with is Sin, and there's a lot of competition between the two, I'd say just, you know, you could definitely go between the two. The aesthetics are a little bit different, of course, so, you know, I think it's just all going to come down to look, brand name, things like that if you are looking for a watch of this type. But as somebody who personally owns and has enjoyed a Damasko Dc66, I can tell you that it is an exceptional watch. It's a great watch to wear. It's a very sort of one of those, it's my most like confidence-inspiring watch in the sense that I know I can be a little bit more carefree when wearing it than, let's say, wearing a vintage chronograph, and I like that feeling with certain watches. And you know, if you are going to look into this, buying one secondhand is a great option because once again you have this hardened steel, so you're not gonna. They'd really have to be whacked really, really significantly to have any damage on them. So buying one secondhand, it's going to look like new, and you're likely going to get, you know, a few $100s off that way. Please read the full review on Worn&Wound. Follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. Thank you.